In the post-Napoleonic European political landscape, many places have realized that they may be better off together than apart. Nationalism and its consequences for humanity will soon be unleashed on the world, but it's important to note that places like Italy are composed of many different political aspirations. There are absolutist kings and vestiges of feudal monarchies still looking to cling to their power across the peninsula, while there are also democratic liberals and radical republicans. There's even at least one very famous theocratic state. Rather than embrace change, there are many that fear change, and in particular, the Pontifical Holy See of Rome knows that there's little room for the Vicar of Christ in an Italy obsessed with itself. On account of his dedication to maintaining his control over central Italy, the Pope, Gregorius XVI, refused modernization, being the only Italian nation to still use traditionalist economics. After all, capitalism is tantamount to secularism. Where money comes first, the Lord comes second, and that he cannot abide. Nonetheless, in the world of Victoria III, the Papal States can, if they are so willing, lead the charge to the unification of Italy, even if they fail to embrace liberalism. It's interesting how, in Victoria III, nationalism is contingent on nothing more than prestige, in the sense that I can do nothing to reform the Papal States in any way, and then become Italy by just being a major power. That aside, this is indeed a Papal States playthrough, and one with quite a few twists and turns that will ultimately result in the defeat of Christianity's enemies eventually. The aims of the Papal States, or whatever they have become, could easily be diluted by the interests of those who do not put the Lord first. We'll see how that goes for them. In today's video, I'll be playing a religious bloc build as the Papal States and eventually the Kingdom of Heaven, but we're taking more of a story-oriented focus. Like normal, I'll explain my actions to help you understand what's going on, and if you want to use this as a kind of guide, keep in mind that I'm not playing to win, I'm playing to roleplay. Let's get into it. Even as early as 1836, the idea of a Roman Republic is something many papal subjects have considered. The Pope is, in essence, a king of this land who rules with self-interest. Despite receiving tithes from the entire Catholic world, the Pope still charges rents like any common landlord, and he charges import and export fees for things from foreign markets. He operates the Papal States like his own fiefdom, and the people are tired of it. In the city of Rome, a pilgrim arrived under the guise of the usual sort of religious sightseeing, a Mexican man named Juan Alvarez, who you might know as the president of Mexico who started La Reforma in our timeline. Let's just say that in Victoria III, he found his efforts to reform Mexico futile, so he took his revolutionary ideals somewhere that he felt could equally use the help. Juan Alvarez is an immense threat to papal authority, but in reality, he is merely the conduit for the feelings that have already long gripped the land. In an effort to prevent the rise of liberalism, Gregorius is spending his money on building farms and plantations which he will then sell to the conservative landlords of the nation. While they are not necessarily men of the cloth who will be eternally loyal to the Holy See, the aristocrats and minor barons that swear fealty to the Pope benefit greatly from his continued position as the Lord of Rome. The Pope takes all the heat as the tyrant of the states, while the barons collect the taxes. It's a happy relationship. Aside from that, more grain means cheaper food for the peasants, and in following the Roman heritage these papal states have inherited, bread and circuses may keep the people loyal. As part of this bread and circuses endeavor, the Pope got to work on reforming the economy of the papal states, what economy of it there is. Traditionally, the peasants were expected to make their own goods as subsistence farmers and simply pay rents for the land they survive on. Now, they will be encouraged to live in homes separate from their workplaces, and to make wages working on actual dedicated farms. In return, market restrictions will be lifted, leading to better opportunities for both the buyers and sellers of goods. This is all to say that I'll be passing agrarianism, which will remove the massive market access price impact malice from traditionalism. Unfortunately, after a continuous loop of debates where the merits and demerits of a new economic system were debated ad nauseum, the Pope said enough was enough and gave up on the entire idea, moving instead to weaken the nationalists of the nation. Racial segregation, as a law, seeks to open up papal identity to anyone of proper European Christian upbringing, and as such, might disempower the Italian nationalists. In reality, I'm passing this law because I got a petition to do it. It has no effect on the nationalists. By the way, since we're talking about the game, I had a very different sort of game planned in my head at first for this run. I was initially thinking to not even unite Italy, and just play an independent papal states that produces food, and I do subventions to feed the world. A sort of righteous papal playthrough where the world no longer hungers, but things quickly changed with the introduction of a few extremely rare variables. First off, I did actually manage to pass agrarianism in April of 1844, which was insane considering how good my chances were. I overall had terrible luck in the beginning of this run, but basically, I modernized the nation with new tax laws, or at least was working on it, and I had a radical in government, so I could become a republic pretty easily. Then I saw in my agitator list a very interesting figure. This is Antoine d'Orléans, and he's an Orleanist member of the Roman Curia. Immediately, I threw out whatever plans I had and decided I wanted a French Orleanist Italy. The Orleanists were, I believe by this point in the game, in exile, as the French Republic had overthrown the monarchy, which might explain why this guy is here. Nonetheless, I invited him in, but didn't give him leadership yet. In order to make an agitator into king or pope or whatever, you need to first go to a republic, get that character elected, and then go back to a monarchy or theocracy. I do wish there were a way to change monarchs of a nation to need to make a republic first, but it is what it is. I finally enacted per capita tax laws in December of 1847, and now it's time to become a republic. That's going to be quite tough since the Roman Curia dominates our politics and they don't want a republic. But then I noticed that little Antoine d'Orléans has an ideology that prefers a presidential republic to a theocracy. That means I can in fact put him in charge and then pass to a republic quite easily. I'd have preferred a parliamentary republic personally, but it's no big deal. Presidential republic will be easy to pass with the support of the Orleanists, and this is where I need to step back and think about like the lore of how this little boy is about to become prime minister. This is a tough one. I like to imagine that the Orleanists arrived in Rome while passing through Sardinia-Piedmont. The Piedmontese government of this time in history was quite strongly anti-French, so these French nobles, destitute, marching through Piedmont, would likely face some attacks from rabid Italian nationalists who were still upset over Napoleon's occupation and annexation of Piedmont some decades ago. Poor Antoine's parents were killed in the attacks, but the remaining loyalists that accompanied them took Antoine to Rome with the hope that the Pope might give the boy a good life in the monastery or something. Maybe, if they were lucky, Pope Gregorius would issue some kind of papal bull demanding the restoration of the Orleanist family, although papal bulls had long since lost their pull in the world of diplomacy. Antoine did well in the papal court, learning from the Cardinals and leading a relatively enjoyable life there. He didn't have what we might call sway or clout among the Curia, but he was becoming a source of prestige for the Pope, whose rule was legitimized by having an exiled French Dauphin to show off to the people of Umbria and Romagna. It would be when Juan Alvarez, the Mexican pilgrim from before, started a correspondence with Antoine that things heated up. Antoine is young, but not so young as to be unaware of his heritage and the power he carries as the prince of a prestigious throne. He also is aware of the prestige of this city, Rome, which during his history lessons had been central in just about every era of time. Alvarez offered to Antoine that he could be king of Rome, but he only asked that first, he let Alvarez become president and reform the nation to be something more progressive. Alvarez wanted to make of Rome what he had failed to make of Mexico in this timeline, but he needed help to do it. Thus, Antoine agreed, trusting that this Juan Alvarez would hold up his end of the deal. Antoine started being less of a figurehead for the Pope and instead riled up the peasants when he could. He spoke of the beauty of a united nation, alluding to that nation being Italy, and suddenly, the entire Italian community had their nationalism stirred by the words of a well-spoken French noble. The plan was working, and soon the Pope realized the mistake of letting this boy into the country. Before he could do anything about it though, in August of 1849, a mob had assembled at the Aurelian Walls, with Juan Alvarez leading them, Antoine beside him. It's over for Pope Gregorius. He was of course allowed to continue his papal duties, but administration of the Papal States was transferred to a new nation called Rome, with El Presidente Juan Alvarez to lead it. He immediately got to work instituting his reforms, intending to keep his promise to Antoine. Real quick by the way, this was the first 13 years of the game, and economically I didn't have a ton of construction, so I've just been building up agriculture, like I mentioned, but also some tools and some iron mines, so I can make iron tools. We want tools for our lumber camps, which are basically the only building we can make in large quantities to help industrialize the nation. I've also been keeping relations high with all the other Italians to eventually make Risorgimento possible, but who cares about all that game mechanic stuff? As president, Alvarez made it his priority to create in Rome the modern nation-state he had hoped to create back in Mexico. His first reform was to the economy, interventionism. While Umbria and Romagna lack any coal to really power a huge industrialization effort, Alvarez at least wants the nation to start importing the stuff and transition out of an agrarian economy. The peasants matter, and the farmers matter, but they'll be best served by an economy that can handle more than just simple rural goods. To aid with this project, Alvarez founded the Roman Forestry Company to be run as a proper business by an executive. This isn't just a system by which random nobles can extract wealth from the workers, but instead a profit-driven company whose primary buyer is the state itself. That lumber will go towards building a great many buildings, and as an additional industry, they'll also be handling the actual manufacturing of the tools too. The company set up shop and got to work while Alvarez finished up his interventionist economic policy proposal in June of 1852. Rome is no longer an agrarian state, although it is still very much an agrarian society. Next, it's time for a protectionist trade policy that would see more of the grain and products of the Republic go towards its people, but while drafting the policy, President Alvarez also had to run for re-election. His reforms were very popular, and he should have essentially no problem at all winning, except that he's quite an old man that has been working for years now without a break. In October of 1852, he passed away from a lung infection, and suddenly, the presidency was without an obvious candidate. And so, in came Antoine, just 12 years old, ready to take the place of Alvarez. He claimed his right to the presidency came from two places. First, he was closest to the first president, Alvarez, and fully intended to continue his reforms. Secondly, it was Alvarez's dying wish that his promise to Antoine not be broken. Nobody except Antoine himself knows what that promise was, but he assured the electorate that that promise was dependent on him becoming president. The people grew to love little Antoine for his role in stirring up the nationalists, and he showed incredible eloquence and strength as a mere preteen. Thus, the people of Rome elected a literal child to the presidency. Yes, this 12-year-old boy now rules one of the greatest cities of all time and its surrounding hinterlands. He finished up the protectionist trade policy Alvarez had been working on, and then little Antoine put forward the truth of his ascension. He's here to become king, as it was stripped from him by the radicals of France. This was a bit strange to the Italians, who had enthusiastically embraced the Republic, but who also were feeling loyal to their president. Is this how kingdoms are established? A bunch of people just put their trust into one person? In essence, yes. As Antoine explained that under his and Alvarez's rule, the people had already benefited so much, and that those benefits will only continue under his rule. He styled himself after Queen Victoria in some ways, as she took the throne at a young age as well, but beyond that, the two had little in common. Nonetheless, as part of emulating her style, Antoine needed a nation to subjugate and prove his strength. Across the seas, Libya and Tunisia had gained independence from the Ottomans during the War for Egyptian Independence, and Antoine decided to prove his military prowess with a war against them. Alvarez had already begun the construction of a Roman navy before his death, fearing potential backlash from the European monarchies over his Republic of Rome, but that backlash never came, so the fleet was just sitting there, waiting to be used. Tripolitania will become the first overseas possession of Rome, and although it's no India, it can certainly be a jewel in the soon-to-be Roman crown. Unfortunately, the Egyptians joined the war, which complicated things, but after the Ottomans decided to start an invasion to conquer the Jordan River, the Egyptians left the Libyans to their fate. The Roman army landed in Tripoli in July of 1856, and soon after the war came to an end with a resounding Roman victory. Antoine's victory in North Africa put the Roman Republic on the map and did a great service to his campaign to be king. In fact, it did so great a job that the entire Italian peninsula, except for Tuscany, who perhaps were looking to their Etruscan origins and all the Roman opposition that comes with for inspiration, Italy unified under the Roman Republic in November of that year, achieving a near total Risorgimento. Venice and Milan remain in Austrian hands, but that will soon be fixed, and the Tuscans will, one way or another, join the Republic. Well, Republic for now anyway. Antoine entered the final preparations for his crowning as king soon. Before talking about that though, let me just mention that the Risorgimento is quite easy as basically any nation. Just keep your relations full with all the Italians, and research nationalism when you're ready to unite. You only need to become a major power, which you can do by just building a big navy and army, which I did in preparation for the war in Libya. It was good that I did build the army up, as indeed the European backlash to a unified Italy came quickly. Spain declared war, looking to take over Tripolitania. The Spanish falsely asserted that North Africa was granted to Spain via the Treaty of Tordesillas, a now ancient papal bull, and that this upstart Italian republic had no right to be interfering in the politics of proper European states. This haughty Spanish attitude only served to put the people's faith into Antoine even more than it had already been, but there remains the question of how he can defeat the actual military power of Spain. Sure, the Spanish are no French in terms of military power, but Italy is just unified. The army barely even defeated the Libyans. Thankfully, Antoine's work in Italy did not go unnoticed across Europe, as the other great powers were looking for an opportunity to ingratiate themselves with the newest European great power. Antoine demanded that Spain give up the colony of Cuba, and at first the Spaniards scoffed at the demand, seeing this war as a sure victory for themselves, but then, the French Republic, which had originally exiled poor little Antoine, decided it would be politically expedient to aid Italy in her war. The Republicans of France were very much so happy to support this rising Republican force in Italy, even if it was headed up by a president of noble blood. In return for the conquest of Catalonia, France would join this war, and that certainly shut up the Spaniards, who were not looking forward to losing that very much important region of their nation. As if it wasn't bad enough, the British also joined in on Italy's side, looking to make friends with a potential enemy of German and French interests. That's right, the Spanish found a way to make the French and British fight on the same side in a war. Alongside those demands for Cuba and Catalonia, Italy also demanded immense monetary reparations, and I wanted to add here that you can avoid the heavy infamy costs of adding cash demands by simply making smaller cash demands over and over again. As long as the amount asked for is different each time you add it to the war goals, it will in fact stack them up. Since the maneuver cost of money transfers increases the more you ask for, you can actually extract more cash from a nation this way and with less infamy than you can by just asking for the maximum cash amount. Basically, Spain is about to cover my entire budget for the next 5 years, and it won't even cost me any infamy. Before the war could actually break out, the Italian people did indeed coronate Antoine d'Orléans as the first king of the United Italy in March of 1857. He did not take the title King of Italy though. Instead, he preferred to be called the King of the Romans, which everyone understood to be an allusion to the old pre-Republican era of ancient Rome, rather than some kind of abandonment of the rest of Italy. The people loved this embracing of their history, and all but the people of Tuscany, or perhaps better named Etruria, celebrated their new kingdom. The big question now though is that of the old Pope. Where does this leave the papacy? The Pope advised King Antoine that, in due time, the Italian fervor for nationalism will subside. One day, it will find flaws in his rule, cracks and fissures through which doubt and subversion will seep. The reason why the Pope worked so hard to not give in to the liberalization of Italy was that out of the euphoria of revolution always comes the inevitable depression of stagnation. You have two choices as king, the Pope said. You either spend the rest of your life achieving ever greater things so that the euphoria never dies, or you replace their euphoria with something eternal. The obvious reference here is to the institution of the church, and that was an interesting idea, one which Antoine, young and full of energy, was quite happy to simply answer with the first option. After all, there's still much greatness to be achieved, no? War with Spain broke out in April, although it was a wonder why the Spanish thought they could defeat the triple alliance of Brits, French, and Italians in a war. Catalonia was quickly occupied by the French, while the Italians attempted to land in Valencia with little success. It was really the well-trained French and British armies that would be handling this war. Obviously, the French did eventually reach Madrid, at which point the Spaniards were forced to surrender and pay an immense indemnity to Italy, while giving up Catalonia and Cuba. Were this campaign about Spain, this would be quite the dark moment for the nation, and I struggle to imagine how they might recover. While that war was mostly a farce, it did teach Antoine one thing. His armed forces are clearly incompetent, or at least undertrained. That makes sense given how young his nation is, so he got to work on implementing military reforms to create a proper fighting force that could take on Austria. You see, the people still clamor for a true, complete unification of Italy, but the army just isn't ready for it. Austria is a hell of a beast, and one aligned with the other beast that is Russia. During the Spanish War, the French Republic went down a similar path to the Italian one, with both being turned into monarchies after ascending their beloved presidents to the position of king. Napoleon III rules France and Antoine rules Italy. The two signed an alliance with each other in December of 1858 with the Terni Protocol. Despite the fact that the army reform is not yet done, Antoine didn't want to lose his momentum in war, so he declared that he'd be incorporating the Duchy of Tuscany through peace or war. That's their choice. The army mobilized around the border, waiting for the Duke to make his decision, but Tuscany is ruled by a member of the Italian branch of the Habsburg family. Naturally, the Habsburgs would come to the defense of their family, and so, that war to take back Venice and Milan would be coming much sooner than expected. Thankfully, much like Spain, Austria is diplomatically isolated, and this war especially would isolate them further. First of all, this is Austria's intervention on behalf of some cousin in a territory they have no business trying to influence. For that reason, Russia did not get involved in the war, viewing it as an Italian conflict. Second, this alienated Austria from the German Confederation, as Austria should have been focusing on her role as the leader of the Germans. On account of that, the Prussians were happy to join the war and usurp the Austrians as the German unifiers. Finally, Austria decided to join a conflict against a nation that had just signed an alliance with the newly revitalized French Empire. Napoleon III is no Napoleon, as in the original Corsican guy, but he's certainly no slouch. And so, in December of the same year, Italian soldiers entered Tuscan borders while Austrian soldiers opened fire on the Italians along the Po River border. Despite Tuscany being the primary aim of the war, the Austrians sent no men to help defend it, and the significantly larger Italian force quickly overwhelmed the state, annexing it with ease. Now the focus of the war shifts to Venice, Lombardy, and Trieste. While Italy still lays claim to South Tyrol, it would be best to keep this war's ambitions limited to avoid stirring anger in any of the great powers who might otherwise feel they're being taken advantage of and used. Of course, that's exactly what is happening, but they just can't know that. Inevitably, the war ended in victory, but it was closer than expected. The Austrians did a good job holding their own. It took all the way until May of 1861 to finish the war, with Prussia obtaining German leadership and Italy gaining its rightful claims along the Adriatic Sea. She's nearly a complete nation, this Italy, but before we can continue the lore, I'll quickly go over some of the actual gameplay here. I haven't been doing anything too out of the ordinary, but I've mostly just been making iron, coal, and strangely enough, farms. I'm trying to play a very casual game of Victoria 3 here, and making lots of grain means plenty of loyalists from the standard of living bonus. I did make the Anglo-Sicilian Sulfur Company, which is special because it lets you make prestige sulfur, but there aren't really any industries I can think of that greatly benefit from a throughput bonus which uses sulfur. That being said, any raw material building, like a mine, is nice to have a company for just because that way you can expand the maximum possible amount of that resource you can have, but I also don't intend to use all the plentiful sulfur available in Italy, so who cares. Also, you may have noticed that I renamed my logging company to Pelaya Forestries Inc. I did this because Pelaya is a channel member. I'm going to start renaming companies after members as a way to say thank you. If you want a chance to see your name in the game like this, become a member. Thanks. Back to that sulfur company though, I decided that since I'm focusing on farming to play a casual game, I might as well go into fertilizer and then use the fertilizer to make even more grain. The fertilizer uses sulfur, so that's nice given my sulfur company. Alongside that, fertilizer is for explosives, and I can use explosives for munitions and mines. Beyond that, I've also put up a bunch of textiles in Lombardy. Well, eventually I did anyway. As of March of 1862, I have a small textile industry there, but it's all owned by France's Dollfus Mig et Compagnie company, which means the profits go to France. Nonetheless, I like the throughput that the company is giving, and I want the clothes mostly for actual consumption in my market rather than for the profits, so it's fine with me. I chose Lombardy for my textiles because it had a local source of cotton and silk, but it's not really that important when considering the fact that France is getting the profits. In a way, it would have been better to not help that business along with favorable mappy positioning, but it's whatever. It was out of my hands by September that year anyway, since I had changed over to laissez-faire. The reason I'm using laissez-faire here is just because it lets me play even more hands-off. I was totally focused on a new task by this point, which no longer cared for things like the GDP or the standard of living, except insofar as those things could help me achieve this new goal. After a long meeting with the Curia, King Antoine reconsidered what the Pope had told him before. You either spend the rest of your life achieving ever greater things so that the euphoria never dies, or you replace their euphoria with something eternal. As Antoine hit his 30s, he could see that indeed his nation will one day stagnate, and so, with the guidance of the Pope, he took on a new mission. Now, the nation is dedicated to the interests of the Church, not necessarily because Antoine particularly cares for the faith, but because using the faith, he can secure a legacy far greater than anything else he could possibly do in his life. The Kingdom of God was founded on November 1st of 1862. It's a Catholic convocation which is for now composed of just Italy and Libya. The king has been tasked with reviving the role of Catholicism in the world, which will give his people a new reason to put their weight behind him. In terms of the game mechanics, religious convocations are much better than they once were. The additional birth rate is a game changer for nations like Italy, which don't have a lot of arable land for migration. I'm using divine economics, which was always a strange principle given it adds clergymen to your financial districts, companies, and manor houses, and lets them invest money, but it now also gives trade advantage to other nations that share your faith. That can actually be pretty useful since Catholic is a common faith. Check out my farms out here in Apulia, by the way. They're not hugely profitable by any means, but these farms are essentially feeding the entire nation, and they're using fertilizer that we're making with our special Sicilian sulfur, so I suppose it has found a usage indirectly. Anyway, it's time to enact the Pope's will, and remember where this Italian kingdom started. The obvious first target for the religious fervor of Italy would naturally be some place like Jerusalem or Istanbul, but I saw an opportunity to the east that seemed juicier. Persia made a play to invade Afghanistan, and the Afghans were looking for support. I decided to join the war in return for a protectorate war goal on Persia. My plan is not to actually save Kabul, since I'll be making Persia subject. I want them to get bigger, so I'll let them defeat Kabul, then swoop in to win the war once Kabul has capitulated. Unfortunately for me, Persia would prove far more incompetent than I would have expected, as they simply could not defeat the Afghans for some reason. It took many years for Persia to eventually win, and I later learned it was because Persia declared this war while still recovering from a bankruptcy. Eventually, Kabul also went bankrupt just from holding the front, at which point Persia was able to win. In the time it took for this war to conclude, I witnessed the unification of the Germans, who successfully even took Alsace-Lorraine from France. After Persia defeated Kabul, I did swoop in to make them my protectorate in a naval invasion. Hilariously, the Persians capitulated to me presumably because they were still bankrupt. Persia is nice to have mostly for the dyes. We have silk here in Italy, but we're missing dyes and opium. Basically, I fully intend to make Persia into my own personal plantation. Now that Germany has unified, I noticed that they were missing some land in Württemberg, and I saw a golden opportunity. I still have a claim on South Tyrol, and Germany obviously wants control over Austria and Württemberg, so naturally, I made a play with the full intention of inviting Germany to fight for me. I can use my extra maneuvers to basically dismantle the Austrian Empire, and what's even better is that I can then invite all of the new countries to my power block. Although Austria itself is already quite Catholic, so it's not like we're making any huge religious plays here. Regardless, it'll be nice to dismantle Austria, who has for so long unjustly ruled over parts of Italy. The war began in December of 1868, with Russia joining on Austria's side. It's Italy and Germany against Austria and Russia, and Germany is a truly insane nation with regards to its military. We very quickly overwhelmed Austria, and the Russians were just kinda there watching, I suppose. Austria capitulated in November of the following year, meaning we dismantled their empire in less than a year of total fighting. Naturally, I immediately went to guarantee and trade with the new kids on the block. Hungary and Bohemia especially will be very nice additions to my block, and strangely, Bohemia is a Protestant nation despite their entire population being Catholic. How strange. Now that Austria is quite tiny, I should be able to get them in my power block too eventually, although they don't like me very much right now. I finally built up that textile industry I'd been planning forever in Lombardy now that I had dyes from Persia, by the way, and it's even making designer clothes, but that is unfortunately because it's owned by the regional company HQ from France. Regional HQs function like domestic ownership with regards to nationalization, but pay their reinvestment to the foreign nation's investment pool. Later on, I'll be finding out that this textile manufactory is the most profitable building in my nation, and I'm getting no benefit from it beyond the clothes themselves from my market. In the current patch meta, I feel like it's just never a good idea to ever give out foreign investment rights, but I like to sometimes for the roleplay anyway. Regional HQs just make foreign investments so deadly, especially on laissez-faire, which I'm using. Were I on interventionism, I'd just nationalize all these factories and then resell them to my own financial districts. Economics aside, in June of 1875, Persia attacked Kokand, who Russia then supported. This conflict then escalated from a simple Persian war in Central Asia to yet another war between the great powers. Since Persia is my subject, that means I take over the war, and that means I can call in Germany. The Italian-German alliance sure is nice, and I'm going to use this war as an opportunity to dismantle the Russians too. Well, I would have, but then Kokand backed down to Persia. That did not give me a truce to Russia though, so smelling weakness, I pounced and started another war for which I could call in Germany again. I'll be liberating Ukraine, Poland, and Kazakhstan alongside Austria, who had joined Russia's power block and become subjugated relatively recently. My goal is to bring Austria into my power block in the near future, so I've been working on improving relations, but I can't invite them to the block if Russia has subjugated them. Anyway, war isn't exactly riveting in Victoria 3, but I did grab the internal trade principle for my block in March of 1876. For a block like this, where I plan to have many non-subject members, internal trade is really nice for making a customs union. Otherwise, I'd normally prefer external trade. It would be interesting though to try and make a power block of people who don't share our market and actually run trade routes between us where, because we're all the same faith, we get trade advantage. Definitely could have been an interesting idea, like having a papal approval for trades from nations in good Christian standing. Imagine like a papal customs board, the PCB, which checks every good at every port of entry to verify its origin and to give a little benediction on the side. Certainly a fun concept. Alas, I have opted to make one large market. There's no need for the papal customs board. The war with Russia continued until December of 1877, at which point the Italo-German armies reached St. Petersburg. While Russia is still certainly a mighty nation, they've lost some very significant pieces of their empire in this war, and I will of course be swooping in to add them to my power block. I'm even going for the Ottomans, who are surprisingly friendly. Sure, they're not Christians, but give it a few years and I can impose Catholicism on them. I also declared war for Greece, and that's because the Greeks seem to just really not like me, and I don't want to waste the time convincing them to like me. They're a pretty low infamy protectorate, so they'll be joining the block by force. It's interesting to me how easy it feels now to get people into your power block. In the past, leverage felt weaker than it is now. I can't put my finger on exactly what changed, but in the past it was certainly possible, but not nearly as easy to get nations like the Ottomans into your block. By October of 1882, this is my power block, and I've got to say, it's beautiful. The Pope could not be happier to see Catholic influence stretching from Italy all the way to Afghanistan, especially once the Catholic religion had been imposed on the nations in between, but we're just getting started really. I added Egypt shortly after in November, which helped cement my control over at least the eastern Mediterranean, and then I went for something of an Outremer Empire sort of thing, which is an empire from Crusader Kings 3, where you conquer all of Arabia and the Levant to form this Catholic Middle Eastern empire. It even makes a unique culture in the game, although there are no such cool nation formations in this game. I did get Hungary as protectorate when they had a civil war in December, which was very nice. I'd like to have all these nations as protectorates, but I'll take just Hungary for now. From here, I actually want to talk a bit about the power of the Convocation block, and I'll do it by simply showing my population graph. You see, with basically no migration, I have been able to get nearly 2% population growth per year, and I haven't even put in public healthcare yet. Migration, I'd say, is a better way to get population growth in general, but for nations with low arable land or a game with a focus on things other than SOL, migration can be hard. Remember, migration tends to be something of a winner-takes-all system. Not like objectively, but it just tends to feel that way. I'm not intentionally keeping my standard of living super low, but through the way I've been playing, I have a relatively low SOL of just 13 as of 1883. The reason this matters is that although mortality decreases as SOL goes up, birth rate only continues to rise until around 15 SOL, at which point it sharply decreases. Basically, I want to keep my pops below 15 average standard of living, but above like 10 or so that the actual change in population is as high as possible. When I add public healthcare, I'll get a direct decrease to my mortality, but I'll also gain standard of living, which could push me to a new SOL level that actually makes my pops have a lower birth rate. Nonetheless, the loss of mortality is probably worth it. This strategy is best done with Catholic nations, since they also have a religious folk bonus for birth rate, but can be done with anyone in theory. Beyond the birth rate bonus, I mean, there isn't much to be said for the power block. You can add whatever principles you want to make it better, and I'm going with the company's principle, and market unification, of course. For my last one, I'm not sure yet, but we'll get there. In December of 1883, I went after Russia again, looking to liberate more nations who I can add to my block, and I'll be honest with you here. I did continue playing until about 1900, but I didn't do a ton of stuff. I built up the economy and continued dismantling empires. Russia especially, I put effort into dismantling, including later conquering their little states in Dobruja and Bessarabia, but we'll get there. The big event, though, was the war against France. As of 1895, King Antoine has ruled Italy for a long, long time, and his connection to Italy is far greater than what little connections he ever had to France. He's known in France as Antoine d'Orléans, but in Italy, and even now internationally, as Antonio d'Orléans. Nonetheless, there's a certain animosity for France that has long been brewing in Antoine's heart. The nation that kicked him out probably felt like they were better off with a republic, or a Bonaparte, or God knows whatever else. The French in this historical period were not well known for their decisive governance, but whatever the case, they rejected their king, who chose to lead a land that appreciated his talents and skills. In the past decades, Italy has become essentially the hegemon of Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East, while France marinades in mediocrity in the shadow of her rivals in Britain. Italy hasn't been competing to control anything really overseas, barring Persia in a way, so there's a respectful neutrality between the British and the Italians. Antoine has, in theory, no reason to go after France, who is otherwise a mere fly to be swatted if it were worth the effort to do so. He has a grudge though, and it's time to make good on it. Antoine declared war to liberate Algeria, Occitania, and Senegal, alongside the conquest of Catalonia and Corsica. Corsica especially is an important symbolic victory for France, whose very own Napoleon is from the island. Corsica has, though, throughout its history, been part of the Italian sphere of influence, and so its rightful return to the kingdom is a point of pride for the Italian people. The Italian and French armies lined up in Savoy ready to duke it out, but it was quite clear the Italians had the upper hand, even without German aid. By this point in time, by the way, the Germans had long abandoned Italy, who had grown beyond them. The clear sphere of influence borders were drawn, with Germany controlling northern Europe and Italy controlling the south, but Italy went too far when it gained control of Poland and Austria. Regardless, by the time the Germans abandoned the alliance, Italy had no need for their help anymore. The war in France will be a long battle, as the French army, although inferior to the Italian one, is quite large. Antoine sent a navy to invade via Normandy, while one army fought in Corsica and the other in Occitania. That strategy proved very effective, as soldiers had to be pulled away from Savoy to fight the invaders in Normandy, and once Corsica was occupied, the army there joined in on the front in Savoy too. France was soon overwhelmed, and Paris was occupied in July of 1896. The French then surrendered, losing more than half of their territory on Earth. Antoine was quite happy with this conclusion of his relations with France, who had at different times been kind or cruel to him. Nonetheless, power is all, and he has shown that his kingdom is better, whether Italian or French. From here, the only real enemy of choice for Italy would be Spain, but the Spaniards have aligned with the Germans. Although France was a worthy opponent and one easily defeated, Antoine is not looking to tangle with Germany, who is probably the premier power of Europe with their Krupp cannons. Instead, as a man entering his 50s, Antoine has decided to be happy with what he has. He remembered, though, the wise words of his papal associates. This is the moment. Now is the time where the euphoria of his great successes will begin to wane, unless he can become something even greater for his people. The papacy is the ultimate prestige for this religious society he's created, and yet Italy and the papacy remain distinct entities. The kingdom of heaven has truly become massive, and yet Antoine will always be a king under the authority of the church. It's time that changed. Antoine got to work on a new piece of legislation, a bill which would see the papacy merged into the Kingdom of Italy. The Italian throne would be merged with the Holy See, and the College of Cardinals would be merged with the Italian Senate, an effective merger of all the Italian and papal institutions into one living, breathing institution, unified under God and King, or, one might say, God King. That is the final accomplishment. That is the final euphoria, for which there is no expiration. You'd think that would be hard to pass, but hilariously, most of my government is composed of radicals, and radicals are equally disapproving of both monarchy and theocracy. That means it's actually really easy to go to theocracy using the Roman Curia interest group, who inherently supports theocracy. Since Antoine d'Orléans is an Orleanist, he does not like theocracy technically, so I had to replace him as leader of the Roman Curia, and it also made the roleplay a little weird, but Victoria 3 has no way for interest group leaders to change ideologies except in very specific random events, so this is the best I can do. Also, since I haven't looked at it once this playthrough, this is the world market chart. I am the largest exporter, but not by a huge margin. Considering how low my GDP is, this is pretty good, but it's important to keep in mind how many nations are part of the market who are also exporting. Anyway, in June of 1899, the God King Bill passed, which saw Antoine become the Pope of this new kingdom of heaven. Obviously, the Pope is not God himself, so the bill is perhaps poorly worded, but it was too cool a name to pass up. Pope Antoine looks pretty cool though, doesn't he? With his monocle and yellow cloak. He doesn't even really look like a pope, and yet his new position of God King is more than just pope, so his attire had to be updated as such, I guess. I changed up the power block name and colors to reflect this new government, opting for more of a yellow color and to name it the Universal Church. This block controls nearly the entire Mediterranean Sea and extends far into Central Asia and Eastern Europe. I just really hate how Bessarabia interrupts my borders though, so I did declare war on Russia just to take that state and the little tip of Dobruja they have. That war was quite easy, as I've already beaten up Russia so many times that they're quite the joke now. The war ended in February of 1901, and that was my last war for the game. Checking out the religion map mode, we can see that unfortunately the Ottomans and Egypt didn't do a lot of conversion, and that's because they have freedom of conscience, which will only convert pops below a certain tolerance level. Compare that to Persia or Ukraine, who do have state religion and who have done an excellent job of converting pops to Catholicism. This new Catholic Persia is a very interesting alternate history, and assuming that one day, perhaps via some kind of world war, that Italy collapses and these nations go free, I can't even imagine the implications of the future that we might see here. Antoine turned 60 in 1901, a wise and venerable old pope whose origins are steeped in exile, hatred, and political turmoil. He was born French, but is now more Italian than any Italian in this land. He'll never be forgotten, especially when he became president at 12 years old. He took Italy from being the mere pawns of other powers to being the kingmaker on the map. Culturally speaking, we've experienced very little migration, so Italy is basically entirely North or South Italian. In other parts of the world, we can see East Prussia has become Lithuanian, which is just insane, and we can see that Schleswig-Holstein has remained Danish. That is also insane. There are a couple other oddities, like Tyrol being Swiss instead of German, but nothing too crazy. This is my GDP graph, which is like, okay. It could be worse, it could be a whole lot better too though. One note to say is that I have investment rights in all of my power block members, and that my private queue has been building a lot in their countries, so my GDP, when accounting for my foreign buildings, could be a lot higher, not that I'm bothering to check and calculate it. This run was more for the roleplay than for any kind of actual high GDP or high SOL achievement. Nonetheless, I consider it a pretty respectable play, especially for starting as the Papal States. Anyway, that's the video. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I hope you feel inspired to try a Papal States playthrough of your own maybe. Thank you for your time.